Hello and welcome back to the South Dakota Dynasty. Today we have the recap of Season 4. We're going to recap everything that happened in this season while also looking forward to the offseason and a small preview of Season 5. So we went 4-8 this year, the second year for head coach Christian Vaughn. He took over for Bob Nielsen in Season 3 of the Dynasty, and we continued our improvement as a team. I think we definitely took some strong step forward. We got an extra win. I think we were more competitive in a lot of our games and actually beat South Dakota State this year in miraculous fashion and just played a lot better. There were still some games where we did not have strong performances, but that's still to be expected. We're still making this climb up the FBS ladder in the Mountain West Conference, but we did continue to improve. And one of the reoccurring trends, it seems, is we did win our season opener. We beat Old Dominion by 7 points. It was a close game. We scored with 3 minutes left. It was tight throughout pretty much the entire game, very back and forth. J.R. Miller played well. He wasn't able to finish the full game, but had 275 through the air, 2 touchdowns. Jaylen Tate had a career game with 28 carries for 141 and 2 touchdowns. He received the bulk of the carries. We didn't really see that continue as the season went along. Deontay Knox had a strong game. Dontavius Knight had 2 big catches. Mcdonald had a nice catch. Then we moved forward. Texas Tech was a very tough game for us. We didn't play super well. Gave up 515 of total offense, and our offense struggled in this one. And this was the game where J.R. Miller went down with his injury and would not return the rest of the season, and that really shifted how our offense performed and the way we went about things. Jaylen Tate added a different dynamic to the offense. He has a little bit of a stronger arm, but not as accurate as we saw throughout the season, but he does add a dynamic element on the ground game, and from this point on, we really started to change how we operated as a team. UAB, that one was a very close game. We just could not do enough to get the win. Tate had a very strong performance in his first career start. He had 237 through the air with a touchdown, no interceptions, had 4 runs of 20 yards or more with 170 on the ground, including a 55-yard run, but couldn't get a whole lot from the rest of our backs. Then we moved forward. We beat Hawaii in pretty dominant fashion, then had a very tough performance against Fresno State, who was one of the better teams in the Mountain West Conference. They played in the Mountain West Championship, but Jaylen Tate struggled. We allowed a lot of pressure on him. This was the game he was sacked 7 different times, and the other backs were able to run the ball well, but he just couldn't get involved in the running game. Then we beat South Dakota State in miraculous fashion. We scored 2 touchdowns with under 2 minutes left. Deontay Knox scored both of them to give us the victory. Air Force was a close game. That was when we lost on a Hail Mary as time expired. Boise State was a tough loss. We couldn't really do a whole ton against them. Hank Bachmeier played well. We threw the ball a little bit, and we really struggled to run the ball. No one had a strong performance in this game. Best overall was probably LaDorian Bolden, and Jaylen Tate was sacked 5 times. Wyoming, they pretty much dominated the whole game and played their type of football. Colorado State was a very close game, and they made a field goal at the end to win. And this was a breakout performance for Rakeem Boyd, who had 174 on the ground with 2 touchdowns, 3 runs of over 20 yards, including that 75-yard touchdown to give us the lead. But Colorado State was able to answer back and take the lead to end the game. North Dakota State, we were dominated in that game. And then we ended the season with a win in very exciting fashion. Rakeem Boyd scored with 9 seconds left. We saw Jaylen Tate throw the ball pretty well, only 11 attempts. His attempts really declined as the season went along, as we really tried to establish more of the running game. Tay Knight had a very strong performance, and really all of our backs. Rakeem Boyd did really struggle in this game, though. So in the Mountain West Conference, in our Mountain Division, the title was won by Wyoming, who had a very strong season, ending at 11-2. We're still at the conference championship, haven't simmed through the bowls yet, but we'll get a look at that Mountain West Conference championship game. It looked to be a very exciting one. North Dakota's finished second, and then outside of those two, not a whole lot of success for the other teams, as only 2 in our division actually made a bowl game. Fresno State and San Diego State were both very good. San Diego State was in the top 25 for a decent portion of this season. New Mexico, and Hawaii were towards the bottom of that division. So J.R. Miller, he opened his season playing well. He had a very strong performance in week 1, ended his career, didn't play the last 10 games of the season, but ended with 51 touchdowns, 50 interceptions, averaging about 200 yards per game, and 62% completion with 7,500 yards. So I thought he was a good quarterback for us. He's like a prototypical FCS quarterback who just does some things well, not super talented anyway, but gets things done. And I thought he did that for us, added a nice element on the ground game, not as dynamic though as Jaylen Tate, who is a much better athlete. He had a better touchdown to interception rate, only 147 per game though. It's probably a little closer to like 160 because the first game he didn't really throw the ball very much. Completed 63% of his passes, but did really struggle at times with his accuracy, which we expected. And then he only threw the ball about 17 times per game and was sacked 27 times, compared to J.R. Miller was never sacked that many times, and Tate only started 10 games. So our offensive line really regressed in that area. Then running the ball, we had 4 different backs with over 500 yards rushing. Ladorian Bolden also added 5 touchdowns and 263, and we really saw the way we wanted to attack defenses change, running the ball with some option, getting Jaylen Tate involved, getting a number of different backs involved as well. And I'm very excited because we'll have Rakeem Boyd and Dontavius Knight back. Jalen Page will be moving on after a very strong career. He regressed in some ways compared to last year, at least in yards per attempt, but he also did miss the last, I believe, 2 or 3 games, so wasn't able to beat his career high in terms of yardage, but had a very strong career in my opinion. He was someone we could rely on. He only fumbled 1 time in the final 3 seasons of his career and had 3 in the first season. First year, he was more of a receiving target than he was in the following years, and then in the last 2 years, our receiving back, of course, was Tay Knight. Knight, I thought, took a nice step forward running the ball, didn't have quite the same yards per rush, but had 3 more touchdowns, double the number of attempts, and over 500 yards rushing, along with adding 16 yards per reception, 22 catches, and 356, with their number of those being long passes and only 2 drops. In the receiving corps, Deontay Knox was our leading receiver, set a new career high in receiving yards, was 2 short of receptions and 1 of touchdowns, at least tying, and I thought he was a very solid receiver for us. He had a career low in drops, which was great to see, and was just someone we could rely on. He's going to get about 500 yards receiving per year, make a couple of big plays downfield. He had a 79-yard reception, a 59, and then a 63 this year. So he was able to create separation even though he didn't have excellent speed. Outside of that, our second leading receiver was a running back. And then you get down Jacoby Patton. He doesn't have much speed, so he wasn't able to make a lot of big plays downfield, only 9.2 yards per attempt. We also weren't taking a ton of shots downfield. Cordell Hicks took a step back. He had pretty much a low in all of his categories, but didn't drop a single pass. And I'm hoping for a strong senior season from him. He should be one of our top receiving targets with no more Deontay Knox. So hopefully he can make an impact and get back to his sophomore level performance, averaging 17 yards per catch with 600 yards. And I do expect him to do that. I expect us to throw the ball a little bit more. Phoenix Mcdonald made a couple of big plays. He had 4 drops, but was capable of making some tough contested catches. And I thought he added a nice speed element. He's our fastest offensive playmaker, but outside of that, doesn't do a whole lot else. Then we had Muhammad Ali Surya, who played for the first time as a senior. He was slower, possession receiver with strong route running and decent hands, and actually ended up averaging 15 yards per attempt, which is more than I expected from him. I thought he'd be closer to the about 10 yards that Jacoby Patton had. Outside of that, we didn't have any other receivers really catch the football, so we'll be without Muhammad Ali Surya and Deontay Knox, so we'll have to figure out where are we going to get some pass catchers, how do we utilize Dontavius Knight and Cordell Hicks to get them in their best situations to succeed. In terms of sacks given up, Jamie Landry, he gave up 5. I didn't really expect that from him. He's a very strong pass blocker. That's what he does best. but he did struggle in that area. Noah Butler, Joseph Pitlick as a true freshman, they both gave up 4, and Bo Weaver only gave up 1. You can make an argument he is our best player on this entire roster. He's super talented, super big, and just does pretty much everything well. Then on the defensive side of the ball, Eric Sukowski, he was the starting free safety and our leading tackler. LaDorian McCray and Jackson Harvey, all of them will be back. Sylvia will be moving on after a very strong career, I would say. He wasn't super great in his freshman season, but since then had double-digit tackles and a good number of, tackles for loss and then tackles. He, in his sophomore season, had a career high in sacks. That took a big step back last year, but he was still making plays, forcing a fumble last year and getting 10 tackles for loss. But that number did go back up this year with 5 sacks, with 14.5 on his career. Terence Mitchell was our nickel corner and also one of our top tacklers. He was a freshman. We had a lot of youth in the secondary with Sukowski as a sophomore, Terence Mitchell as a freshman, Latrell Hill as a freshman, and then Deion Kendrick as a sophomore. DeMarco Anderson took over for Ross Bukowski when he went down, and he was only a sophomore. So everyone in our defensive backfield that started the final game of the season will all be back, which is very exciting to see. Jawan Hooper, junior college guy, I feel like he dropped a lot of interceptions. I had high hopes for him, and he didn't necessarily live up to them, but hopefully he can have a strong senior season. Then Dion Perkins was our second middle linebacker in our 3-4 sets, or just sets where we had 4 linebackers on the field. Deion Kendrick had 2 interceptions and 2 pick sixes last year, only 1 interception this year. That's something we've continued to struggle with and just don't get a lot of turnovers. Then we have Tevin Robinson, Ross Bukowski, all moving on. Jerron Covington is a true freshman. I had high hopes for him, and I think he lived up to the billing with 3 sacks, 6 tackles for losses, our nose tackle, and made disruptive plays. So in terms of tackles for loss, LaDorian McCray, Sylvia, and Tevin Robinson, along with Jackson Harvey, lead us there. Thought we got a good step forward in getting pressure and forcing sacks. We blitzed a little more, and I think that allowed us to be successful there, but only 4 interceptions and 1 takeaway outside of that, which was a fumble recovery. So we struggled in that area. And the thing is, we had chances for interception, but just didn't take advantage of them. So now a look at some of the career stats, as we do have a number of long-term Coyotes moving on. J.R. Miller, of course, we saw his season statistics or career statistics earlier. And then Ezekiel Wood, who is the 3rd-string quarterback and then backup quarterback again, only attempted 21 passes in his career. In terms of rushing the ball, over 2,015 touchdowns for Jaylen Page at 4.4. And then Jaylen Tate, already second in attempts in a career currently on the roster. So he will move into first going into next season. Tay Knight with 800 yards and 11 touchdowns. Rakeem Boyd with 628. Majority of those came this season. And then LaDorian Bolden will be moving on with his 6 touchdowns and 62 attempts. He really took a much bigger role in the offense this season. At receiver, we will be losing the all-time leader in this series in Deontay Knox with 131, 2107, and 18 touchdowns. And then Cordell Hicks will be back. 3rd on the roster currently in receptions is Jaylen Page, who will be moving on. We'll have Jacoby Patton back, and Phoenix McDonald. Muhammad Ali Surya will be moving on as well, though. To the defensive side of the ball, Sylvia Widenar leads us in tackles with 212 in his career. Ross Bukowski with 209, so those are 2 big holes that we'll have to fill. One positive, though, is DeMarco Anderson did get a decent amount of playing time this season, so he will have that experience to step in at strong safety. Then tackles for loss, only 2 years in the program for Tevin Robinson, but ends up with 19. Shado Hansen with 17 as a 3-year starter, I should say. And then in terms of sacks, Shado Hansen ends with 11, 14.5 for Sylvia. So we'll be losing the top 3 sack guys on our roster. Outside of that, then you have Jerron Covington and Jackson Harvey with 3. Bukowski had 5 interceptions in his career, and then outside of that, everyone else with an interception on our roster will be back. So just a quick look at the Mountain West Conference Championship game. Looks like it was an all-time classic with Wyoming scoring 3 different times in the fourth quarter to force overtime and then getting the victory in comeback fashion. Looks to be very exciting. We know they like to run the football, and it looks like they did just that, getting all 3 different runners involved. So we move forward now, and we finally see who the Heisman Trophy winner was. And it was a pretty tough competition between Phil Jurkovec and Trey Sanders, but Jurkovec does win with 45 total touchdowns, about 3,000 yards through the air and 500 on the ground. So he stays at Notre Dame and wins a Heisman in his senior season. So now we'll get a look at the All-Americans in the country. So we see Trey Sanders and Malcolm Davidson. FAU is very good this year, ranked in the top 10. Few players from Miami on the offensive side of the football. Not sure if we're going to have any on the first team All-Americans, and we won't. Then second team, Clemson's quarterback is the second team All-American there, Jaden Hazelwood. And we move forward, and no first team or second team All-Americans. Then freshmen, we see Oscar Arnold, who is very good for Colorado State. 18 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 375 on the ground. He'll be back for the future for them, and that'll definitely be someone to keep an eye on as he continues to improve. Then other freshman All-Americans, Terence Mitchell does get the honor there at cornerback, which is great to see. And now to the Mountain West Conference. North Dakota State gets Stevie Johnson on there along with Antonio Andrews for Wyoming. So no one on first team offense. On the defensive side of the ball, no one representing us at all on first team All Mountain West. Eric McCutcheon, who will be back for another season for South Dakota State. Then a couple offensive linemen for North Dakota State. Then the second team, and it looks like completely left off of all of the All Mountain West Conference team. Very surprising to me. I feel like we could have had at least a couple defensive players like Sylvia, Tevin Robinson maybe, or even Terence Mitchell with 3 interceptions with a pick 6 as well, but no one there for us. So just a quick look at our roster real quick. You can see the top players who are rated the highest. So Deontay Knox, Sylvia will be gone along with J.R. Miller, Jalen Page, Tevin Robinson. So a number of our best players will be moving on. But we'll also look real quick to see some players who I think can make an impact for us next season. So we had both Christian Smith-Brown and Noah Whiting redshirt this season. They're not super highly rated, but we've seen Rakeem Boyd, as someone who wasn't highly rated, be able to produce, and we like to use a number of backs, so I definitely think they could become involved. Christopher Smith at fullback could have started over Ladorian Bolden this year, but I wanted Bolden to go out on a high note in his senior season, and I think he could make an offensive impact for us. He's a decent blocker, has some nice acceleration, and could just be a good ball carrier for us as well. At wide receiver, we have some major concerns. We lose the best receiver we've had so far in this series, and then we will return Jacoby Patton and Phoenix McDonald, but can either of them be a number 1 receiver? And then outside of that, you really drop off in talent. You're looking at players like Nathan Ellenbecker, Tyler Lanning, who was a redshirting this season, Trey Bryant, Ethan Miller, and Brandon Harrison. The one thing about the receivers we brought in, they do have some nice athleticism compared to the players we started off with. So that could be something that we're able to do, maybe try and push the ball down the field more. So on the defensive side of the ball, Xavier Thomas I expect to have a bigger role with Shadow Hansen moving on, along with Shedrick Simpson. I liked both of them coming out of high school. They'll both be redshirt sophomores, and most likely will be starting for us at the defensive end positions. I'm not sure how big of an impact Logan McGee could have for us, but I did like him coming out of high school. He redshirted this year. I think he sort of fits in the role that we want that left outside linebacker to be. Sort of similar to Sylvia. He's not quite the athlete that Sylvia is, but does have the ability to cover both in zone and man and rush the passer. So he could definitely be sort of a jack of all trades that we're able to utilize. And he does kind of remind me in some ways of Jackson Harvey. So now we get to the recruiting portion of the offseason and a look forward really towards the next Coyotes who will be on our roster. It was another big graduating senior class with 18 different players moving on. So we had a lot of holes to fill, and I think we were able to do that effectively. Elijah Eason was one of 2 quarterbacks we signed. He's a decent athlete, not a great thrower, and just needs time to develop, which he will have behind Jaylen Tate. than Dexter Johnson. I think he could be a nice pass rusher for us. He's a little undersized, only 237, but is a local kid from South Dakota. He's not super fast, but has some nice finesse moves to start, and probably will only be a pass rushing specialist with that low block shedding. Omar Rogers is interesting to me. He has great size for a tight end, which we haven't really had so far in this series. He's 6'5", 262 from Virginia, so he's spread out a little more to get this recruit. He's not a superb athlete compared to a player like Cordell Hicks. Doesn't have super sure hands, but has some nice route running, some nice potential as a blocker, and I think with time could be a good just starter for us with strong blocking. Hopefully his hands improve, so he's a solid pass catcher who can run some routes. The other quarterback we recruited is Isaiah Simon from North Dakota. We beat out North Dakota for him. He's undersized at only 5'11", but he is a better athlete than Elijah Eason, but not quite of a passer. Similar accuracy, but not as quite strong of an arm. So it gives us options moving forward on what we want in our quarterback. Do you prefer the better athlete who's a slightly worse passer, or someone who has a little stronger of an arm but might not be quite as dynamic in the running game? I think one of the most talented players we got in this class is Chancellor Adams from Nebraska. Had a battle with South Dakota State for him. 5'10", 215, so he adds some size to our backfield that we haven't really had so far. He's not fast, but is very quick, and I think with time could potentially be a nice pass catcher out of the backfield with his route running, but is not really going to make you miss or necessarily run you over, but does have some decent strength, and is just a one-cut runner who should be able to be a nice player for us. Not sure if he'll make an impact in this first season. Another area that we've lacked is size in our receiving core, so we went out and got Trayvion Hart from Montana at 6'3" with great speed. He was a gem that we found. His biggest real pro is he has some decent run after the catch ability, along with strong athleticism and size. Jaylen Paul, he isn't necessarily what we've been targeting in offensive lineman. He doesn't have the size we're looking for, but definitely has the frame to be able to really grow into his 6'6" body. And he's a pretty decent athlete, and with time to develop, I think could be a very strong addition for our offensive line. Nolan Durant, I really like him. I think he has a very promising future with the Coyotes. 6'2", 215, so sort of a prototypical college linebacker at this point. He's from South Dakota. He has good athleticism, and I think with time could be sort of a Jackson Harvey type player with the ability to stop the run, rush the passer, and cover, but would be a better athlete than Jackson Harvey is currently. LaShawn Olsen from Polson, Montana. He's another guy. He's not super big, but is a decent athlete and will need a lot of time to develop to get his coverage ratings better. Timothy Hart fits into that left defensive end role at 6'6", 280. Maybe could shift inside and play a little bit of defensive tackle in some of our sets, but he has some decent strength and potential to improve in block shedding and power moves. Sammy Exum from Minnesota. He is an interesting player to me, similar size to Nolan Durant. He's a great athlete, but outside of that, I'm not sure what he really brings. But I think redshirting him and given time to develop, he could just be someone who runs sideline to sideline and potentially could develop as a coverage player as well. Jordan Hurt, another safety. We've recruited a lot of safeties so far in this series, and he has some decent athleticism for a safety, but has really good zone coverage to start off and block shedding. So he may actually fit better as a strong safety who can play in the box and cover underneath, especially without superb athleticism. Denzel Oliver, a little undersized for a defensive tackle, but we need to continue to build depth there. We haven't been able to get a ton of talent in our recruits there outside of Daron Covington, and he's just another guy, a little undersized but decently strong, and needs time to develop outside of that. Daniel Hernandez from Iowa, another offensive lineman prospect, and another guy who needs time to develop, but starts off with some decent run blocking ratings. Keyshawn Johnson, probably the second best player in this class. He's from Vermilion, so a hometown kid, 6'1", 212. I'm not sure where his best spot moving forward is because he has the ability to rush the passer, maybe could be a good run stopper at some point, and also has the ability to develop as a good coverage player as well, along with having some good acceleration but not superb speed. And then the best player in the class we got, it was a tough competition with Wyoming and UTSA out of Minnesota. 5'10", 220, so undersized, but it's DeAndre Law. He will enter as a sophomore, will slot in as a starter immediately somewhere in our linebacking core. He's got great athleticism. He can stop the run, he can cover, he can rush the passer, he can hit hard, pretty much does everything well, and may be the most talented player that we've ever gotten onto this roster. And I have very high hopes for him, and I'm super excited to see him in the Coyote uniform. And then the final player we've gotten a commitment from so far is Deshawn Calhoun. He's undersized at only 6 foot, from Canada, but fits into that left end role, decent strength, could develop as a decent pass rusher potentially with some nice acceleration, but I think just needs time and could be a good run stopper as well. So we currently have one spot left on our recruiting class open. I'm leaving it open because we lost on Edgar Barrios to Iowa, could leave it open for a transfer. We also have Ryan Simmons. We have a lot of depth at the defensive end position, but has some nice athleticism and a good power move. Ty King is also interesting, only 5'10", but does have good speed and could be a good developmental player for us potentially. But outside of that, there's not a whole ton of talent left on this board, so we'll have to just try and figure out what's the best player for that final spot. So in terms of where our class currently ranks, we're 119th. That's a big part of that is 13 one-stars in our class, but I think we have a lot of talent in this class that'll continue to build the bottom of the roster and then also add talent to the top of the roster with players like DeAndre Law, Keyshawn Johnson, and Chancellor Adams. So just a couple more things to look at. We do have some new people in our record book. Sylvia Widenar leaves the school with the series high in sacks. Deontay Knox sets a couple with touchdowns, receptions, and receiving yards. So all the ones currently are owned by him. And then J.R. Miller with passing touchdowns and passing yards. Rakeem Boyd set a new series high in rushing touchdowns with 9. And the new career holder for rushing yards is Jalen Page, beating out Pierce Libby. So we'll look at the bowl results now and then the top 25 final poll. So we see Fresno State lost to Temple, ending at 9-5. Other games, North Dakota State ends with 10 wins, so a very strong season from them, beating Southern Miss in the Hawaii Bowl. And then we move our way down. North Dakota and South Dakota State did not make a bowl game, so nothing to look at there. Now getting down to the BCS games. So Purdue makes it out of the Big Ten and gives Florida Atlantic their first loss on the season. The Owls end 13-1, 10-0 in conference. Bo Nix leads them to a very strong season. Southern Cal in a tight game with TCU results in a 3-point win for the Trojans. As TCU suffers their first loss, they were left out of the national championship game, going 12-0 in the Big 12, 9-0 in conference. Tennessee ends 13-1, beating Clemson in the Sugar Bowl, and then Miami ends 13-1, beating Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl. So a lot of one-loss teams end in the poll, so it was a very strong season at the top of the sport. And then in the national championship game, UCLA ends a perfect season, 13-0, beating the Heisman winner and Phil Dracovic. Dracovic looks like really struggled, only 139 and 2 touchdowns. They did run the ball pretty well, it looks like, and then running the ball for UCLA. Doesn't look like they had a ton of offensive yardage. Neither team really did. No turnovers. So it just came down to, at the end of the day, what UCLA was able to do at the start of the game. So the final top 25 poll, UCLA ends at number 1. Notre Dame stays at number 2. TCU receives some first place votes. So we see a little bit of a split in the final polls, with Florida Atlantic even receiving a vote. But you can see 5 different teams with only 1 loss, then Tennessee with 1 loss, Florida with 1 loss. Alabama ends up going 10-3. North Carolina in the top 25. Rutgers, San Diego State ends at number 21. And Texas Tech rounds out the top 25. But I hope you did enjoy season 4 of the South Dakota Dynasty. It was a fun to make, took a little longer than I wanted it to, but I expect the off-season live stream to be this Saturday, probably around 12 or 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm excited to move through that, meet some of the new players, get to see them in practice, and see what this team looks like moving forward, and how much improvement we can see in Season 5. I think the goal for sure is to get to bowl eligibility. Take that 2-win jump, get off the only 1-win jump that we've been having in all the other years, and make our first bowl game. I think we'll have talent back to be able to do that, and hopefully we can reach our goals and get to the first bowl game as an FBS program for South Dakota. But I will see you for that off-season live stream. I hope you have a great rest of your day.